Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
I don't want anybody to think that we didn't get tired and didn't shiver in a ditch. We also did that.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Episode 122. We bring back an old podcast friend, Rootstock Racing. Just about a year ago, they did a race in Africa, Expedition Africa in Namibia. Had a great time, great experience. We recorded this one not long after the race, and we held it in the vault just in time for the upcoming race season. This is a good long one. A lot of race fuel here, a lot of interesting stories. Matt Cymanski is clearly the hero of the podcast and the race because he was his first major expedition race, and he is hilarious and a strong racer, and he was a fun guest to have alongside Brent, Abby, and Garrison. So thanks for being here. You'll notice on the ads that we've switched out the Wilderness Traverse. They are all set with racers, so we have an ad going for the Wild Driftless, which is a new race right around the corner. They don't pay for any ad space here. We don't charge for the ads that we put on there. Instead, we like to support new races and new racers. And so please give the Wild Driftless a good listen. They did a nice job on their ad, as well as Ascend Athletics, who has their upcoming Hike for Her event. Again, thanks for being a listener to the Dark Zone. Hope that your race season is getting off to a good start. We're delighted that you are here. And remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.
Hello, this is Frank Johnson, and I'm thrilled to announce that adventure racing is coming back to Iowa. The Wild Driftless Adventure Race will be October 4th in the Driftless region of northeastern Iowa, featuring two options, the 9-hour Wild Driftless and the 4-hour Wild Driftless Light. Come and explore the region's rugged beauty and let us help you shed that image of Iowa you have in your head. Gone are most of the cornfields. Instead, you'll be greeted by sheer rock faces, hardwood forests, and crystal clear trout streams. We have fun single-track mountain biking, those famous Iowa gravel roads, Riffley River paddling, and fantastic forest trekking on a course designed to challenge avid racers while also serving as the perfect entry event into the sport. This is an adventurer's adventure race, and we hope to see you there, October 4th, hosted at Camp Iwalu in Strawberry Point, Iowa. Wild Driftless is a proud member of the Wisconsin Adventure Racing Series. Learn more at www.wilddriftless.com.
As listeners of Dark Zone know, we are big supporters of Ascend, Leadership Through Athletics, working with women and girls in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Ascend and their annual Hike for Her, hike and auction is right around the corner, Saturday, May 10th, 2025 in Sky Meadow State Park in Delaplane, Virginia. If you check our show notes, you can see registration information as well as their online silent auction. All are encouraged to follow those links and learn about the good work that Ascend is doing in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And as always, they pay nothing for this spot. We enjoy the work that they do and are proud to support them. Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. So for this episode, we're bringing back 3 of 4 former guests to tell us about their experience. We have Abby Perkiss, Brent Freedland, Michael Garrison, and Matt Cymanski. They were Team Rootstock Racing. They raced recently in Expedition Africa in May of 2024. Expedition Africa put on by Heidi and Stefan Muller. This was their last Expedition Africa. They advertised it that way. A famous race, a hollowed race, very, very popular, held in Namibia. And we are delighted to have them on the show. They had a fantastic experience as they covered that course over the 6-day race. Abby, we're going to start with you. First question I want to give out to you there. 4 people, team dynamics, bringing the team together. How did this version of Rootstock Racing get together for Africa?
Yeah, kind of by happenstance. You know, Heidi and Stefan have been talking about doing this course or this race in Namibia for a number of years. I mean, dating back, I think pre-COVID, they were planning it and then were not able to run it because of COVID. And so maybe a year and a half ago, Heidi mentioned to us that they were running it, and we were beginning to plan a 7-month backpacking trip through Africa. It ended up shifting some, but she was like, all right, well, let me know, when will you be in Namibia? We'll make sure that the dates line up. And obviously there was a little bit of jest there, but it got us thinking more seriously about the possibility of adding that to the race, or to our trip. And she also said, not in jest, give us your kids, you will come and race, which was kind of an offer we couldn't refuse.
I got to point you there real quickly. You kind of put race directors on notice, like free childcare during a 6-day race. There are race directors that are kind of trembling right now hearing you say that out loud.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's not something that like anyone could replicate. It was just this magical kind of constellation of circumstances. And if memory serves, we reached out to Garrison and chatted with it and chatted with him about it. And we're very clear, like, we were not going to be in shape. We were not going to be training. We were going to be coming off of 7 months of family-paced adventures. Did he want to take a trip around the world and join us for an adventure? And I don't think it took much time for him to jump in. And then we were trying to think about who that fourth might be. And again, a little bit of a hazy memory on this one, but Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we actually reached out to Alyssa, Matt's wife, who was recovering from a knee injury. And we thought, well, Alyssa probably won't be 100%, so we won't be holding her back too much. So maybe she would be interested. And then she said, I don't think I can do it, but what do you think about Matt?
She's like sitting on the couch, right? Looks over and says, wait a minute, I got somebody for you. And all of a sudden, Matt gets pulled into
Matt's
that.
real strong. Like, I don't know if he's going to want to do that. But yeah, it worked out. And the four of us, I mean, a lot happened between then and the race, but the four of us met in Namibia.
But that's just about the team game together. And so there's an interesting dynamic in question here. And Brent, I'm going to come over to you next for this next question here. That the team was coming from 4 members. 2 of the 4 were on this extended trip, this 7-month backpacking trip. This was basically the culmination of the trip, right? You were pretty much at the tail end of the trip at this point, coming into the race. Brent, as you were going through your adventures and you had the family backpacking trip, knowing that you had Namibia kind of looming off in the distance and getting ready for a multi-day race is nerve-wracking when training is normal and things are bouncing along. How did you get yourself mindset mentally prepared for the experience of going from a backpacking trip into a 6-day adventure race?
I mean, speaking for Abby, I don't think we did. I mean, I think, to be honest, it was like, to back up a little bit, I remember being in a Zoom room with Matt and Mike back in probably October of last year, right? When we were really having a kind of honest conversation about what this would look like and saying to them, like, look, we're not training. Like we can't, like, it's impossible, but I'm sure we'll be in better shape than we think we will. And in my head in that moment in October, it's like, well, we can run. We might not be able to bike much, but we'll run and we'll get our hands on bikes here and there. And it'll work out. The reality in April, right, or early May, basically within the month before the race, is there's been no running. There's been no biking. There's been nothing. There's been no paddling. I mean, the extent of paddling was a boat trip across a 1-mile lake in Nepal in, I think, March in Pokhara, where somebody is guiding us across the lake, and I'm sitting in the bow of this boat with a single blade canoe paddling as hard as I can to pretend that I'm actually doing something to prepare for paddling. Biking, like, we had a really good week of biking in, I don't know, Abby, what was it, February maybe, in Cambodia?
Over Valentine's Day.
Yeah, it was like the one time in the trip we actually had decent bikes and time to use them, and we kind of made the most of that 1 week. And then I'm not sure I got on, I did in Vietnam, got on a bike. I think Abby did too, but it was like a Wizard of Oz bike felt like I was the witch riding through the cornfields of Kansas. So there's no training. And like, so you get to a point where you're like, you can stress about it,
or you can just
accept it.
Right.
You're going to accept it for what it is. And you're just going to hope that something magical happens to allow you to not just finish the race because you want to finish the race, but more importantly, like, I hope I can at least allow my two teammates who are carrying all my shit across the Atlantic Ocean for me to have a good experience, and really kind of savor the moment. So I chose to kind of let go of it because there was really nothing we could do to really be more prepared.
Okay. On the other side of the coin, we have Garrison and Matt Cymanski, who were coming over carrying all your items across the Atlantic Ocean. So Garrison, give us a bit of your biography in terms of 5-day races. I know you were at Iterra. I know you've done other races too. Walk us through where Africa fell in your world when it came to being an expedition adventure racer.
Well, I think the first time I did an expedition was 2012, but I was too intimidated, which is ironically is where I met Brent and Abby for the first time, like significantly. But it took me a few years before I started racing more. I think I was intimidated by the length and the commitment, and the people I was racing with weren't as much into expedition racing. But by 18 or so, it was kind of becoming more of a normal thing. And then the last 4 or 5 years, I've really made a focus on trying to do an international race a year that's kind of experience focused, meaning I want to go somewhere cool with people I enjoy racing with and have a good overall experience. And so, yeah, when it was an interesting introspective psychological moment when they're like, yeah, we want to do Expedition Africa. If you want to do it with us, we're not training for 6 months. What do you think about that? And then part of me was like, all right, so we're probably not going to be pushing super hard, but that feels pretty good to not have the stress. Like the chances of me being the one falling apart are lower, I guess.
Well, no, that's a really valid point, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when you do a race like this, you don't need to be the fastest person. You just don't want to be the slowest person.
Yeah, and that said, though, like I have never been a very like worthwhile or valuable mule. And coming into this, I was like, I need to be ready to carry some more stuff because these two are going to have to race themselves into shape over the first few days.
That's a really good point. That more you and Matt may have more demanded of you because of Brent and Abby's the challenges of their trip and the lack of training that they'd have. More might be called upon you.
Yeah, but honestly, this particular race, we never saw a drop of water after we left that opening paddle. That's not true. It got foggy the last night. I guess that kind of counts as water. Yeah, I forgot about that. And that was the only time there
were those puddles on the final trek, like 3 hours from the finish.
There were puddles, which was really bizarre to see, like water just sitting there.
You did realize you were racing in Africa.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay,
and like we knew, but like the reason I brought it up is we had basically no cold weather gear, minimal rain type stuff, like the burden of carrying extra stuff. If you're going to do it in a desert race.
Good point.
Don't do it in an intense pack rafting race or a winter race because then you're carrying an extra 8 to 10 pounds of stuff, not like one. So
Got it.
I actually thought you were going to say the opposite because of how much water we had to carry.
Well, they carry most of their own water. Like they're on their own for that. Like we'll carry the other stuff, like the extra fleece or wool layer or rain jacket. But you kind of, for the most part, want your water with you. We carried some extra bottles at times, but that was kind of the extent of it.
Well, we're going to come back to the question around the water and fleece because I saw some pictures from that race of some racers that were just so dehydrated and so beaten up. So we're going to come back to that. So now, Matt, this was your first multi-day expedition race?
Right.
Okay. So walk us through so this is an interesting one to say yes to. Right. And you obviously we know that you're a strong racer. You've had really good results, strong in the national championships, great schemo racing. So physically you're coming into the race strong. What was your psychological mindset like coming into the race, knowing the dynamics of Brent and Abby, their travel? I don't think you've raced as a team before, the four of you. What did you do to get yourself ready for the race?
Yeah, this was the first time I'd raced with any of the other three. And like you said, first, I guess I'd done the 30-hour Two Rivers, probably my longest race before that. And then I did a multi-day skiing race that was like 40 hours or so. But seemed kind of like a good opportunity for me to get my feet wet in expedition racing without, too much pressure. So I spent a lot of time in the winter skiing, and then just try to do as much stuff as I could with a pack on, basically leading up to the race. Training in Vermont, obviously, it's a little tough to kind of simulate a desert environment, but that was kind of the goal, was just to try to be as prepared as possible for whatever I could do to help the team out. And also just kind of like mentally think about how we could function best as a team.
Got it. And so, because you lived inside, clearly, as someone who has done a lot of racing, done a lot of team sports. You did the very successful there. You had a psychological understanding of the demands that would fall upon you before the race.
Right. And my goal, or my sort of thought process going in, was just kind of spend the first day or a couple of days of the race just kind of figuring out how the team dynamics worked and where I fit in and how expedition racing worked, and just kind of, try and be a cog in the machine as much as possible, rather than causing issues for the team.
And I think that's a really good thing to bring out there for the newer racer who listens to the Dark Zone, is that you had the conversation with yourself before the race about the mindset you needed to have at the beginning of the race to get along well. Because some people, they may want to take too early of a leadership role out of nervousness, right, or out of fear. Like they want to exert some sense of control over the team, but you knew that you were racing with 3 teammates that had done this before, so you sat back and you watched and you learned along the way.
Yeah, totally. And that was kind of what I was looking for out of the whole experience of, I learned a ton of what types of things to bring on an expedition race, and kind of how to plan and how to strategize. And, before the race, we were kind of packing our gear, and somebody was like, "Oh, does everybody have a toothbrush?" And I'm like, I didn't bring a toothbrush. Why did I need a toothbrush? And thinking back, we're going to be out there for 5 or 6 days. Of course, we're going to want to brush our teeth at some point, but, it's just not something that's on the typical one-day race packing list.
I had the same exact experience when I raced in the Faroe Islands, that my teammate Shelly was like, "Where's your toothbrush?" I go, "It's not like we're going to sleep. I need to brush your teeth." And she talked about how brushing your teeth refreshes you, but also it gets all the gunk out of your mouth from all the food and all the sugars that you're eating. So it takes care of that. So Abby, let me kick it back over to you. In terms of you've done this before, you've traveled overseas internationally, you've gotten, we always say that the hardest part of racing is getting to the start line. Before we get into the race itself, how did Rootstock do with getting all of their gear and all of their materials, their food, their water, their bicycles, all of that stuff into Namibia? Did everything travel nicely? Was anything get lost along the way? Did all the boxes make it? How did that work?
Yeah, I mean, on some level, I feel like you should be asking Mike and Matt this question. Like Brent and I literally packed bags at the beginning of November and left them in our garage and spent a long time coordinating, as Matt said, cogs and wheels, like each stage of our gear's journey to Namibia, which, we had Anna Stewart, who lives in New Jersey, drove I think one set of gear down to Ozark and then handed it off to Garrison, who then drove it back to Indiana, who then flew with it to Namibia. And that was kind of the story of mine and Brent's gear. So eventually both Garrison and Matt had their bikes and gear bags, and each of them had one of our sets of gear. And it all got there, and there weren't even any massive overage fees. I think, Matt, you got charged for one of the bikes, but that was kind of it, which just seemed like an AR miracle.
Well, I could see that being a real issue. right? Because you're traveling, as hard as the travel is with your own stuff, you're bringing other people's things along the way too. Because like flight, there's like airline personnel look at you kind of weird. It's tough to get through. So why is this person bringing all this stuff? And that just sort of went smoothly.
We used a lot of good karma. Both Matt and I had people at our check-ins that were unfamiliar with how to check in bikes, and I got charged nothing extra. Like I get zero baggage fees at all on the way there, just because I don't think they knew how to enter it the right way. Did get charged on the way back, but all in all, it was pretty manageable. It was entertaining watching them open their stuff. I don't know which one of them said it was like, it's like Christmas morning in there.
I'm keeping a running list, by the way, of records that were set during this whole experience. So first things first, I think that Brent Navia set a record for the least amount of training in advance of a 5-day adventure race. Right.
We trained, like I trained less than I would for like a 6-hour race.
Right.
Like
a lot less.
Nothing. Right. A lot less. So, and then I also think you set a record for the earliest packing ever from the start of the race. Like you were packed in November for a race that was being held in May. Okay. I'm just keeping a running list of all the records that you sent during all of this.
I shouted out Anna Stewart. I also want to shout out Mary Shear, Sherry Himes' wife, who literally was like on a business route from North Carolina back up to Vermont, stopped at our house, met, I think, my parents at our house, got into the garage, got our gear, and then drove it up to Matt's. So we had like the AR Village was real for this one.
Right. And not to get too inside baseball, the bike box is still not yet returned, right, Brent? Because your bike box is currently sitting in my garage.
Yeah.
It made it across Ridgewood.
Yeah, so it has yet to make it back. So the journey continues for the bike box.
Yeah, the only issue we really had was in packing in November. Somehow I didn't pack bike shoes, so we unpacked everything and a few days before the race. It's like, oh, I don't have bike shoes. So it was a trip to the bike shop and a decision of, do I buy new bike shoes or do I buy flats for my bike? So I bought flats and played around on that, and for the most part, except for one brief moment on who knows what day, it worked fine. So yeah, it was pretty good. And probably one extra
shout out from clipless to flats just to see what would happen.
Oh, I mean, it wasn't to see what would happen. It was kind of out of necessity, like a financial decision of I can spend $30 or $40 and get flats, or $150 or $200 on bike shoes that aren't going to be broken in at all for a race with a lot of biking when I'm in horrible biking shape. So yeah, I just decided to go for the flats. They're still on the bike.
And you also might be walking the bike a lot more, right? So you'd be in your sneakers. So therefore who
knows? Yeah. Okay. Thankfully there wasn't actually much walking, but yeah, it was good.
Okay. So coming to the race itself, Garrison, I'm going to kick it over to you. Coming over to the race itself, walk us through the pre-race experience for the team. When did you get your maps? How long did you have them? And what was the race start like?
The race start was like the hours, right? Just the day leading up to the race start and figuring out the logistics of the race start. It wasn't stressful for me and Matt, but we had like ancillary stress because Brent and Abby had to be parents with their 2 kids right up until when the race started, basically. For the handoff to take place. And so, we got everything at the race start, but it was I don't remember, it was a ridiculously early wake-up call, like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., something like that, to get on a bus for 4 hours, to go from the original host city of Windhoek out to the coast where the paddle started. And then we didn't get maps until we got to the beginning of each section. So from that perspective, thankfully, there wasn't like, oh my gosh, we're going to get maps with 2 hours of lockdown and 5 days of race to plot out here. It was a fairly straightforward paddle, and then kind of transitioning from that logistics part, and then Abby and Brent having to figure out how to hand off the kids to, hey, we're racing now. So
that start was there. So just so I heard you correctly, you only received the maps for that stage, and then you would get and I'm assuming, Brent, and you would know the answer to this question, did you have to plot your own maps like they do traditionally, or were the maps pre-plotted?
Yeah. What Expedition Africa does is they have a table set up with some, I think 2 copies of maps just hand drawn where the checkpoints are. It's your responsibility to transpose them to a blank map they give you in TA.
Okay.
So,
which, by the way, was at the World Championships was huge because the team that was near the front ended up mismarking their maps and ended up being relegated.
Yeah, as a navigator, there's no right or wrong in our sport, which is one of the great things about our sport. Every race director is completely able to do whatever they want to do, and there's pros and cons to just about everybody's system. It's a really interesting system, and I think it does add a level of focus, which is interesting. When you get into sleep deprivation, both for the racers and I'd say also for the race directors, that's like mistakes happen and there's no like backup, right? So if you screw something up in that transition area and you go out there with the wrong information, like you don't have the luxury of being able to check your coordinates and, make a correction out in the field. Like that's it. So unless you happen to bump into another team who's willing to give you the information you don't have, it definitely adds a little bit of a level of stress to everything.
Did you find the stress level was lower because you got a fresh set of maps at every TA?
Yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it personally. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting idea. We're actually going to play around with it a little bit. Not the same kind of thing. We're not going to have plotting. But, just at our Two Rivers in the fall, do a modified version of it, right, where you kind of roll maps out as the race goes to remove some of that pre-race stress and also add a little bit of that challenge of kind of planning as you go. I think it's a fun challenge as a navigator.
Okay. So you mentioned navigation, Brent. Were you the primary navigator? Did you pair up with anybody else during the race, or did the whole team kind of kick in?
Yeah, I think I typically am lead navigator on the team. I think our team generally, our core team, Rootstock Racing, is very fortunate to have a number of very good, competent navigators. For various reasons, I tend to take lead when I'm racing and then kind of lean on a couple of different folks, Joel Ford, Nikki Driscoll in particular, back in the day when Jim Driscoll was racing, we didn't race a lot together, but, Jim, Paul Miller, more recently, I think it's what's kind of made our team probably overachieve our physical abilities is our kind of navigation strategy and being able to have kind of two lead caliber navigators on maps. So for this race, one of the interesting, I think, challenges for us, right, was, I guess in expedition races, I should also mention, Mark Latanzi has raced with us a lot for expeditions. I think Mark and I have raced together, a lot. And, with Abby, the three of us have raced together quite a number of times. So, Mark often fills that role when we're racing with him. So for this race, it was an interesting question. Garrison is a highly accomplished navigator in his own rights. And I actually kind of removed myself from that conversation. And you can ask Mike and Matt how that went down. Matt, I think, ended up playing kind of the backup navigator for the whole race, I think. So we had two sets of maps. He had the second one. And it's always an interesting question of how's that going to work, especially with someone that you haven't raced with before. I have a ton of respect for Matt as a navigator and his team Vert. They've been kind of come onto the scene in the last few years and been incredibly successful. So I didn't have a lot of concern about giving it a shot, but you never know. But it worked really, really well. And I think Matt, I would love to hear more from Matt about what he kind of observed in that first 36 to 48 hours. What exactly did he learn about the sport and multi-day racing and such? But, he at some point, found his voice. I don't know if he actually found it or he just kind of felt comfortable from the beginning. I think he was chiming in from the beginning of the event. But it was really smooth, which is great. I think it felt really kind of natural, which is what, we're used to. And I found that I could really trust him to kind of offer good suggestions And I mean, I think without fail, every time he chimed in a way that was challenging is not the right word, but like, hey, what about this? It helped, which I think is exactly what we're used to in terms of having two navigators working together. So it was great.
So I do want to pop over to Matt real quickly. Abby, do you want to add something to that, or do you want me to go over to Matt?
Oh, just literally the words that came out of Matt's mouth every time we were like bobbling just a little bit. I have a theory. And then we'd sit down or he'd pull out the map and show it to all of us. And he was right without fail. I can think of 3 or 4 examples specifically where I have a theory came out. I feel like it was one of the quote board entries for the race.
Well, and it started as him saying it and us being, oh, really? You do? And then by day 4, he would say, I have a theory. And everyone would be like, okay, stop. Like, what's he going to say? Because so far it's been gold every time.
His batting average is excellent.
Yeah. And I know, like, navigating myself too, I know it's a delicate balance of wanting input from your teammates and needing to be in your own headspace to navigate well. But
right.
I mean, Abby and I had to go really deep in conversation topics because our job 99% of the time was just to stay out of their way because they worked really, really well together. So we just kind of, once every couple hours, like, you guys doing all right? All right. See ya. We'll go back to chatting while you guys, work your way through this stuff. So it was fun to watch.
And so to that point, and Brent, thank you for theorizing, seeing my next question that was going to come up. Matt, coming to you now, as someone who is getting a crash course in all of this, how did you find the start of the race, the first 36 hours, that first paddle, having the maps in your hands? What was that like for you when the race would start? Overwhelming, not overwhelming? Was it what you expected, not what you expected? How did you find it?
Yeah, that's interesting to kind of think back to before the race started and what I was thinking about. I think the first 30 minutes of the race were just as frantic as every other adventure race, where there's just people going in every direction. And, I think when we got in the boats, I think Garrison and I were like the last ones to get going. And we were like, I was like, I can't believe these people are going to race this hard for 5 days. And turns out not all of them were. But yeah, it was once we kind of got into the swing of things, I think we got to the first checkpoint, and then I'd kind of looked at the maps a little bit, and looks like, this paddle looks pretty straightforward. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of navigational challenge here. And about 2 minutes later, Brent comes up and is like, "Hey guys, what do you think about cutting across this?"
Was that a portage?
Yeah, so we did a portage across, I guess, like some tidal flats.
Because in my notes about this, as I tracked the race pretty closely, I saw that and I thought to myself, that smells like a Brent move right there, because really anybody else went in that direction. So Matt, what was your, well, we'll come back to you in a second there, Brent. Hold on a second. So Matt, when he said that, what did you think?
I thought, I've watched a lot of dots, and, Rootstock is pretty known for like some sort of off the wall navigational theories. So I was like, okay, this is definitely a Rootstock race now.
Brent?
I mean, we were racing in the desert, so I couldn't make the team swim, which is what I'm really actually known for. There's no swimming. So I felt like this was my chance to kind of throw a wrench out there. And in all seriousness, though, it was like kind of a fluke thing. We had been at the start line. And I would love to go back to the start line and just kind of reflect a little bit on how unique that was for really for
pier,
me.
Right? You walked out on a pier?
Yeah. And it was, you'd alluded to this, but like it was not the start you'd want, or pre-race start that you'd want, in that, we get off the bus and Zoe immediately just melts down. Right. So it's like we have to manage that, which was mostly on Abby. Abby's mostly dealing with Zoe in those moments. Not normally, but in that particular moment, she was. And, Heidi's trying to be really helpful, and a couple of the volunteers are trying to be helpful because they recognize, right, like what we're trying to actually accomplish here. And coming in and doing this 6-day race, and we had the deck stacked against us already. So all we need is a 10-year-old melting down at the start line.
Well, and she wasn't doing anything wrong. It was, we had spent 6 months, just the four of us, and suddenly we're like, here you go. You're going to hang out with these relative strangers for.
Yeah, there's no doubt that her reaction was completely appropriate to the situation.
Yeah. And she was aware of it and prepared and knows Heidi well and all of that, but it's still.
It's still mom and dad are leaving.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So absolutely. Right. And like she ends up in a car. I don't know where she was. She ends up in a car by herself for the I think half hour or so before the race, because she can't deal. And that's fine. Simon's kind of around. He's also he's pretty mopey, clingy, just kind of quiet. So at some point, Heidi's like, all right, we're doing a flag ceremony, which normally in our sport means everybody just walks around with a flag, relatively low key, no big deal. So I'm like, all right, I'll take Simon's. I put Simon up on my shoulders and we, join the crowd and we just start walking. And this is a tiny little town. Walvis Bay is, a small kind of harbor town in kind of central Namibia. And, they're not telling us what we're doing. So I just figure, well, we're doing this walk along the very short waterfront area, and then we'll come back and we'll get ready to start. We end up out on a pier as a big group, like a dead end pier. And then all of a sudden the race starts and I've got Simon on my shoulders. I come running along with Simon on my shoulders. It's just a really disjointed start for, I think, at least me and Abby. So anyway, right. While we were getting our kayak set up, I had looked out across the water and I see this very distinct stone structure. I don't even know, almost like a hut of some kind out across the water on the peninsula of land that basically shelters the bay that we were paddling in for the opening stage. So I see that. I don't think a lot of it. Move on. So we paddle out, and the first checkpoint was an out and back from the start through a very shallow kind of sandbar filled bay, also full of flamingos, really scenic. And so we go get the point. And we were toward the back of the pack, as Matt alluded to, everyone went out really hard. And we turn around and we're coming back and I'm already this is going to suck, right? We're already at the back of the pack and we're having to get out and pull our boat through these sandbars. And it's long. It's kind of like a crescent moon to get out to the main water, back by the start. And I happen to just randomly look out across the land and I see that stone hut. I was like, well, we could just get out and just walk over to that hut. It was on the water line. I could see it from the start. We could just do that and we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be shorter. I don't know if it'll be faster, but we won't have to get out and drag our boats through the mud. And if we're getting out anyway, why not do it that way and shorten things by a bit? So we went for it. I don't know if it worked. I think we did actually gain a little bit of time, but it wasn't a significant shift or anything.
Right. I thought that was an interesting Rootstock Racing style start to the race, that all the teams are coming around it and you were cutting right across it. And I do think that history will treat you kindly for that experience, because I think it did save you some time and it was a good way to start the race to get going. So you had that first paddle, flamingos. Abby, you want to add something?
Well, it did blow out Garrison's wrist.
I was just going to say, I felt that for about 2 weeks. I learned what acute tendonitis was from carrying that boat.
Well, welcome to the race. You're a half hour in.
Yeah, right?
Your wrist hurts. So Garrison has the wrist going. You cut across the water. You finish the paddle. You see the flamingos. What came after that?
We had a short-ish trek through the dunes into the sunset, which was just so cool.
That was beautiful. Yeah, that was about 12K, right?
That sounds about right. Yeah. And we'd started with just a run on the beach. And, we had all talked before the race. We're not going to run. We're just going to, journey. We're going to take our time. We're going to be methodical. Brent starts sprinting down the beach. I was like, all right.
Sprinting strong. Sprinting is strong.
I guess this is what we're doing. But it actually went fine. And we ran, 5 or 6K down the beach and then cut east. And just this spectacular sunset trek through the, like the quintessential Namibian dunes, like what you think of
I mean,
when
those
you
pictures are like out of a movie.
Dunes.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden, now that's the first sunset, right? So you're up early, you have the race start, you have to manage the children, you have all the excitement, all the energy, you do the run, you do the paddle, you have that first night. How long had you been awake by that point at the first sunset? Like, were you going into that first night? Were you basically up since like 2 a.m, 1 a.m? I always like to get a sense of when someone talks about their race, and sleep is always a big thing, and we'll get to sleep eventually. I always start the sleep count, like the calculator in my head, when they wake up, not when the race starts.
Yeah, none of us really slept the night before the race. I think we ended up talking about that on the bus. We each got, I don't know, maybe a couple hours and then dozed a little bit on the bus.
So was your night one really your night two?
Probably night one and a half.
Night 1.5. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So you had that beautiful sunset, and just holy cow, like they could not have ordered nicer photos for that. So paddle, sandbar, flamingos, bad wrist, trekking over the dunes, and then you get on your bikes. And then how long was that first bike?
I can talk about it in broad strokes and experientially, but Matt or Brent could probably give you more granular detail about the navigational pieces and distances of it.
I think Garrison was actually navigating this bike leg.
Oh, sorry, Garrison.
I had a map. The
nav seemed pretty straightforward. I mean, the first chunk of that bike was just going north on the same road. It looked, from the guy sitting in his couch, it looked that way. But feel free to disabuse me of that.
All
notion.
right.
Let it out.
So you're right. Like the first hour and a half was on a straight shot road along a railroad, which was not uncommon for this race. Stefan and Heidi had actually talked to me and Abby a bit beforehand, and they were a little bit limited with the biking for the race in general. If there was any weakness to the event, it was that, and it was not a reflection of the race directing. It was just the reality of the situation. Like, had they tried to make the biking more interesting with the routes, we would have been like walking our bikes through sand most of the time.
Okay.
So the roads, a lot of the roads that are actually relatively bikeable parallel really major features like like major roads or railroads or power lines. So a pretty big chunk of the course was that. So it was fine. So we started off that way. It's kind of a little bit boring and mundane in that it was dark, and we hadn't slept much the night before. So you're already feeling a little bit more tired than you feel like you should. But then there was this really fantastic, it was the best biking really of the race. There's this great stretch of a handful of hours of relatively speaking, single track, and some, good checkpoints and some fun riding, all good overall. We did kind of have by far our biggest issue of the race in that there was a checkpoint that we really, really struggled on. And, it was a mixture of A, it's dark, B, there's this kind of network of desert trails, but a lot of other trails. The trails that are mapped on the course are a little bit different than what's on the ground. We'd done well up to that point navigating through all of that, and other teams were struggling. We actually caught and passed several teams and were moving up on teams that were ahead of us. And we literally rode to the checkpoint, right? Like, we nailed it. And there was a team that was, I think, right at the checkpoint. The clue was a trail junction. There's a team right there, standing there, and they clearly don't have the point. They can't find it. We kind of, in that initial moment, figure, well, okay, they're not at it, so we need to go a little further, which also felt reasonable.
And these were typical orienteering flags, right? What were you looking for on the ground?
No, they use just flat placards. And most of them are placed in ways that are relatively visible. Like, they don't hide checkpoints. So the issue was, it's the desert. There's nothing there. So at this trail junction, there was a small rock cairn, which we did not see. I don't know if they were hiding, not hiding it on purpose, but I don't know if that team was standing in front of it, or they just were right next to it. We just didn't see it. It was a very small one on the ground. And the placard turned out was on that cairn, like just kind of on the ground level. So long story short, I think we spent 2.5 or 3 hours like riding back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we were not like every team was doing that. There were a bunch of teams that were there when we got there doing it. Then there were, those teams, and we did it together a lot. Other teams came in behind us. They did it a lot. It was really frustrating. And I mean, the last thing, which I still don't really understand it, but, when you look at the race map we had and where the plot was, and I said this to the team multiple times, it was plotted on a side hill. The trail junction was marked off the summit of a spur, and the actual trail junction and point was really on high ground. I don't really understand it. It might be the scale of maps, and it just was kind of deceiving, but it was a bit of a red herring, intentional or not. I don't know. But
a lot of folks got tripped up there. That wasn't just you. And it was at one point as we were watching it from the comfort of our homes, we thought that you had gotten it, and then we were like you had passed over the point on the tracking map, but then you kept going back and forth. Yeah. And this was nighttime?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and were they reflective?
I don't think so. No. Okay. And
so there for a second, you're looking for a non-reflective placard sitting on a cairn
on the ground.
On the ground.
Yeah,
okay.
I think I may have been the one to spot it first. I literally didn't see it till I was 3 feet away, and I don't think I said I got the checkpoint. I think I just started using my curse words. Right. It was that combination of relief and frustration, because we knew, I kind of lost track of exactly where we were on that ridge in the desert and on the night and stuff, but I knew we'd passed it at least twice, if not 3 times within, 10, 20 meters. So.
Yeah, I think it's an hour within like 50 meters of that point, probably.
Yeah. So Matt, let me kick it over to you then. What was that like from a first-time adventure race, expedition race perspective, seeing that kind of nighttime frustration? How did that land on you?
Yeah, I think in any race situation that's frustrating, and for me that was really my first time experiencing that. Like I wasn't really looking at the maps. Like we stopped a few times and we're kind of all taking a peek, but I was just trying to figure out, there's not a whole lot I can do at this point. I'm just kind of along for the ride and trying to keep my eyes peeled. But
right. And your job is to follow as much as you can to it, but meanwhile let it unfold in front of you as it was unfolding in front of you.
Right.
Okay. Was there, and I asked this question for the newer racer, was there ever any thought of abandoning that checkpoint? What would that have meant what would have had to have happened for the team not to have gotten that checkpoint?
Yeah, the way that race is set up, it's very old school. So it's you got to get every point, and they have the course open long enough that for probably the average team, like that's reasonable until the end. So on night one, like you can't leave it, like you'd be you can't.
So we
hadn't even
go ahead.
Like we hadn't even like gone to our first, whatever you want to call it, in case of emergency break glass option, which is to go all the way back to the previous checkpoint. And I think we had one other really prominent thing that we're like, man, worst case, we go back to that and just walk our bikes straight through the desert on a bearing to find this thing.
Right, attack it again.
We still had other options, yeah.
Okay. But you find the checkpoint, Garrison comes across it, everyone gets that shot of dopamine, that little shot of adrenaline, because now you found the checkpoint. It's great to know where you are, and you continue with this part of the bike portion. How much more bike did you have in front of you after? No.
I think this will be fun, because I don't think we've ever really fully talked about this. We've alluded to it, I think, as a group, but what happens next is I get really pissed off. And
now so you're talking,
when you leave the checkpoint, there's a trail out, and we start down the trail, and then we lose the trail. And that's where I'm just like, can I use really bad language? I'm just like, fuck this. I'm so done right now. And in my head, I'm also
Just 1 second. So just to paint this picture, like this is kind of a moonscape of sand with some hard packed trails cut into it. So we're not in the woods. There's nothing discernible about this. Like, especially at night, we can see like the routes, and there had actually been a big like big mountain bike race there recently. So there were some guiding directional arrows, but like to lose the trail is like, it's almost impossible not to. Like we're just biking through the abyss.
And you can see lights in the distance to like use as a know which direction you're going, but you don't know if it's 1K away or 20K away. Like there's no depth perception out there whatsoever.
Gotcha, because of the whole the vastness of the whole thing. Okay. So Brent has his moment. Keep going.
Yeah. And so I'm just like, screw it. Like, we're not going to waste our time on this. We're just going to ride. We're going to ride across the desert. And so we just like kind of start coasting downhill in the general direction of travel. As Garrison said, it was like, well, we saw lights over there. The trail must be that way. So let's go. And it kind of worked. And later we actually did this a few times in daylight, and it worked exceptionally well later in the race. Like we cut some corners on our big bike that I think few, if any, teams did. One of them, I think a couple teams did. The other one, I'm not sure if anyone did. And it worked awesome. And when you can kind of see where you're going, not such a big deal. Ultimately we ended up like, somehow crossing the trail without realizing it, ending up down too low, and probably lost another, half hour to hour because of that. Then figuring out where exactly are we correcting, and then having to climb back up higher than we would have if we had just actually figured out the trail. But I don't know. So we got done with all that and finally found the next checkpoint, got back on track, which was great. And then I realized, oh my God, like I haven't trained in 8 months and my legs aren't working. And we're only like, I don't know, at that point, maybe 25 to 30 miles into the opening bike leg. And we have like a 200 plus kilometer bike ride coming up in a day and a half that I'm like, I don't know how I can do that.
And at that point, Matt in his head is thinking to himself, what is going on right now? Matt, where were you during all this?
Yeah, I would say that. So we went through the paddle and the dunes, trekking, and that kind of all went how I expected it to go. And then we get on the bike. This is like right as it's getting dark, and we start riding down this long straight road. And I think we're taking it pretty easy. And Brent says, "Hey guys, we gotta slow down a little bit. This is too fast." I'm like, "Oh man, this could be a long 6 days." And then fast forward a few hours, we're like, I think we stopped, and like Brent's just laying down in the middle of the desert. This is like night one. I'm like, oh man, I don't know about this. This is like was a good decision to come all the way to Namibia or not. But
now, at that point, when you were watching this unfold, and Brent was stretching in the desert, let's call it that, how did the team rally from this? Walk us through this, because now, guess what? You all knew this was coming. You knew you were going into it. You knew the training. You knew the travel. You knew all of that. How did you rally from this?
Yeah, I think at that point, the rest of that bike was, in my memory, just kind of a death march. I think we had gotten all the checkpoints, and then maybe there was one more on the way to the TA, but it was kind of like 20K or something like that stretch back to the TA. But luckily there was like a big descent back down. So I think we kind of all just said, at least to ourselves, let's just get to the TA and see what happens.
Well, the good news is too, is that you were done with having not that navigation was over, but the navigation, because you were now heading to the TA, the navigation felt a little less high stakes. Is that a fair statement to make, Brent? Because it was just bringing home then?
Yeah, it's funny. Like after we finished the actual bike trails, which was, again, great until it wasn't, but then it would have been good afterwards if we had just, been focused and had a more straightforward time with it. But yeah, after that, it did turn into a bit of a slog, which I think is just reflective a little bit also of like what the biking was going to end up feeling like a lot of the time. And so that was hard. And then mentally for me, it was hard because it was just like the internal monologue of, what Matt just shared. I was having the same conversation of like, oh my God, like I feel this bad right now. And we still have, 4 days of racing and a couple really, really big challenging sections physically. So there were a lot of like, kind of bad vibes going on internally for me. Sounds like for Matt too. But thankfully the next leg was a big trek, which felt like something that would be more accessible for me and Abby. And to be clear, like Abby felt better than I did. And I think overall felt steadier than I did. We had some different experiences with the race, I think. So just kind of focusing, it really turned into the classic, like you just got to focus on one thing at a time. Like that's what gave us a chance and gave us a chance to kind of like, race ourselves into shape and make the most of it.
Well, that's the big lesson, right? The lesson we always tell newer racers is don't focus on the fact that you're doing a 6-day race. Focus on the fact that you have one more checkpoint you have to get in front of you, right? And go from checkpoint to checkpoint to checkpoint to TA, and eventually you're at the finish line. The folks that fall apart are the folks that they see the enormity of the experience, and it collapses in on itself. Instead, you said to yourselves, we have to go here. What was it like in that when you got to that TA? The fact, how long did you spend in that TA? I know you were transitioning from a bike to a trek. What kind of shape? Where were your feet? Where was your stomach? Like, how were you as a team? How were you all feeling at that point?
So we had to deal with maps at that TA. And back to what you were just saying and what Brent just said, I think actually getting the maps stage by stage was really instrumental in staying focused in the moment. We knew what was coming in broad strokes, but we didn't have a lot to anchor ourselves on beyond what we had in front of us, which mentally made the race, I think, a lot more digestible. So we got into that TA. It was this oasis in the desert. Am I remembering right? We were in that TA 3 times. There were kind of a couple like very large loops. So we were there on day 2, and then we were there on day 3, and then we were there on, I don't know, day 17.
Right. You kind of loop back through itself.
Right. So we were able to order food. We had a hot meal there. Brent and Matt did the maps. I think we were probably there maybe an hour and a half, which was longer than we had projected beforehand. But the combination of hot food and maps, I think, got us anchored in place for a little while.
Gotcha. When did you take your first sleep? Get Brent.
There was also we were getting right. Yeah. So we were getting close to being ready to go, and we hear a crash and kind of a shout. One of the volunteers had been climbing up a relatively rickety ladder to hang some kind of banner or something, and the ladder had collapsed. And I went over with some medical training and took a look and just eyeballing it. I was like, that's a broken leg.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. Okay.
No, it didn't look good. I mean, I don't remember what time it was, but it was, it was the middle of the night. It's probably like 1, 2 a.m. And the one other, I guess there were 2 staff members there. They clearly were wide-eyed and they did have a medic, but the medic was sleeping somewhere. And the somewhere we learned later the next night when we came back and actually slept in the somewhere. The somewhere was a ways away. It was like the better part of a 10-minute walk away. So, I kind of stepped in to just help out a bit. Okay. Which probably added, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes to the TA, but in a way, not actually. I mean, I felt terrible for obviously the staff member who did ultimately, she broke one of the bones in her leg above her ankle. But it was one of those, moments also, which was a bit of a refocusing, right? Where you kind of get out of your head a little bit and focus on something else that at the end of the day is more important anyway than what you're doing. And then we kind of finished TAing and got out of there, but yeah.
So to that point then, so you get there and good job helping out that volunteer and take care of that person. And it's amazing how stuff comes at you from wild parts during adventure races. I'm glad that she ended up being ultimately okay. Now we're tough paddle, trek, tough bike, TA, food. Where were you in terms of sleep as a team? Had you slept yet?
No, we hadn't. Okay. So this was like night 1.
Okay.
I think we probably left the TA around 2 a.m. or so.
Okay. So still very early in the race. Yeah. So sleep really wasn't on your. Did you discuss a sleep strategy before the race as a team? Did you decide when you were going to sleep, or were you going to see what happened when you got out there?
We discussed sleep strategy before the race. We discussed sleep strategy for what we raced 90 hours. So about 68 of those hours, we were talking about sleep strategy, not just for us, but like sleep strategy in general,
Right.
and talking about long sleeps and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about it, but we pretty much knew with it being a trek that we were going to make it close to that, hope that to some point where we could sleep, on the second night. We had other plans that didn't quite work out as we had hoped, but
Yeah, so
Okay.
one thing that I think made us talk about sleep strategy a lot more was that before the race, Stefan told us don't race between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m.
Oh, that's
Something
right.
like
They
that.
wanted you guys middle of the day. They wanted you shut down, right? Out of the
Right.
sun.
Yeah. So we, sort of thought that was a good idea at first. So we were kind of had that in the back of our heads as we were thinking about sleep.
Got it.
And the way the trek was laid out, it was, I think, about a 50K trek. And probably 2/3 of the way through, there was a sort of aid station where we had a bin and then they had water there for us. And they told us there was kind of like sleeping arrangements. So one idea we had in our heads was we could get there around that midday point in time and then just kind of rest for a while and then continue
Gotcha.
with the rest of the trek once it had cooled down a bit.
Was this the trek across no man's land, or was that later in the race?
The next leg was the bike across no man's land.
Bike. I thank you. Say the bike across no man's land. So in looking at your tracker for that trek, how did the navigation do? Your track looks pretty steady along the way. Any curveballs navigationally, or did the maps hold up and the trekking hold up?
I got to jump in on this one before Brent or Matt can say anything, because Abby and I, again, we got to observe this, and the maps that they had were 1 to 50, which is not uncommon in an expedition, but it's a little tricky because there's a lot of detail that's missing.
Mhm.
And on top of that, there were no grid lines.
Oh.
So they had to kind of calibrate their eyeballs, because there was nothing on the map overlaying the detail, for them to be able to estimate distances and stuff. And the details of like a lot of travel through canyons. And this is a situation where I was like, okay, I'm not interrupting them. I'm just, Abby and I are going to talk and we're going to let them sort it out. Cause like the first couple of checkpoints, I took a peek at the maps. I'm like, oh my God, that looks terrible.
Right.
Like, I'm kind of glad I'm not responsible for this time. So in watching it from the outside, you could tell it was a little bit deliberate at first. I wouldn't even say slow, just very methodical and deliberate. And by like halfway through that canyon section, I mean, they were pretty much nailing it and walking from point to point. And the one like little flub we made, as soon as we got to a certain point, like, oh yeah, we did this and that. We're listening to them talk about it and hearing like half the words, and they immediately knew where they were and got us right back on track. So it was really interesting. That, I think, more than the bike or the dune trek, was where I think Brent and Matt kind of got into the map, as you say, and started clicking.
And from psychologically, from a team perspective, going from the challenge of the bike, right, and being in the dark and looking for the cairn being in the way, it must have been extremely gratifying as a team to have that sort of check, like the maps were just flowing along smoothly. Brent, where was your head at this time? Were you starting to bounce back?
Yeah. I mean, trekking has always been my personal favorite and strongest discipline, and then you add in the navigation piece, and like it's just I'm in heaven when we're trekking, and especially when it's interesting, and which it was. I mean, it was really an amazing trek. And then we're catching teams on it as well, which felt good, and like seeing them making the wrong decision when we made the right one. So it was a very good psychological section for us, I think. And
you actually beat me to my next question. Talk to me about, some races like this, you see other teams all the time, you cross paths. Some teams you don't see any teams at all. How much other team interaction did you have during the race?
Yeah, a fair bit, which, is surprising. It wasn't a big field, and it was also like, it's a race where like literally it's the desert. Like there's just no one there in one of the least densely populated countries in the world. So, I mean, It was about as remote of an event as I've ever done. But like often happens, right? You get through the first day of racing and you kind of end up in your bubble, right? And that it was no different, So there were kind of 3 or 4 teams that we were around, and then a handful of others that we either passed at some point and moved on, or were around us in the first day or so and then got away from us. But yeah, I think there were 3 teams that we were kind of around a fair bit, and we saw them from the start all the way through the end. So
in the beginning of our conversation, the idea of water came up very early on. Matt, talk to us about water management. How hard was it with the water? How much did you have to carry?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times we were starting out with 5 to 6 liters of water.
That's a lot of water. It's a lot of weight.
Yeah. We didn't see a drop of water. At least we did see some fog. We mentioned that. But once we left the ocean, we didn't see a drop of water, like natural water that we could drink for basically the rest of the race. So all the water we were drinking was provided by the race. So we had to, on 2 of the longer legs, they did have a kind of midway checkpoint, and there was 1 gas station that we rode by. But yeah, so we were carrying quite a bit of water to make it through, and also sort of rationing because there's a few teams that got into some trouble, I think in part because they ran out of water. And it's always hard. You kind of have some idea of how long it's going to take you to get to the end of the leg or the next water stop, but there's always curveballs. So it was definitely a kind of another big topic was how much water we were carrying.
So let me kick this question to your 3 teammates, because they've done expedition races before. Was this your thirstiest race in terms of was this the most water conservatory race you really had to think about the entire time? Like, was there fear of running out of water?
It was definitely something that we were aware of. Garrison and Brent and we didn't all race together, but we were all at the World Champs in Wyoming in 2017. And that was a pretty deserty race also, with similarly really long bike legs, but the stakes didn't feel quite as high in terms of we were just out in the middle of nowhere. And I think we all talked about this a little bit after the race, and I think agreed that we would, or I'll speak for myself, I would absolutely race in a desert environment again, and one where those stakes are pretty high. It would have to be with a race director that I trust to manage it. Agreed. As well as Heidi and Stefan did. And I never had any doubt that they would put racers in a situation with that, I felt like they were in control of managing the situation.
It's funny, as someone who watched the race closely, this is the first time that I actually thought about, I knew that you were going to be well supplied with water by the race directors. I knew that you'd manage it well. So I really hadn't thought about that before our conversation now, about the fact that there was a true blue exposure component, right? The idea that there were some teams, I saw videos of some teams that they were just broken. Every ounce of them was dry. And I think there were some teams that actually, the teams kind of came apart at the seams a little bit, and some of the Frankenstein teams were built during the race that people just were so dehydrated they had to step out of the race.
And this is where racing conservatively the first couple days to give Brent and Abby a chance to get their legs under them. I mean, that was one of the biggest windfalls we had, I think, because we weren't pushing at that pace where we were burning through as much water had we been going out there trying to really, really get after it. And we kind of figured out how to budget. We got a little more confidence in how to manage the water, and nobody ever got to a point, nobody even got close to a point where they were detrimentally dehydrated, which you can recover from that in some cases, but that takes a lot out of you, and you're not going to get all that back before the end of an expedition. So that really worked in our favor, and is why I think we did as well as we did on some of the latter stages. Is we never went that deep or burned all the matches or whatever those first 2 days.
So let me ask you this question: what calculation did you use the amount of water that you had to carry? How did you know that 5, 6, 7 liters was the proper amount?
Because it's all we could fit.
It's the storage capacity we've had.
That's it, right? I mean, not, yeah, exactly. I mean, not to be cute about it, but that was we're going to carry as much water as we can, and that should be enough water to get us through. That was basically the calculation that you were making as a team.
Yeah, and the funny thing was like we're doing a leg that's 12, 14 hours and we're carrying 5, 6 liters or whatever, because that's what we can carry. And then we got to a leg that was finger quotes here, only 6 or 7 hours. And so we all carried like half the water, which was dumb because out there you can easily drink a liter of water
Right.
comfortably. Right. And so that was the only leg that we ran out of water on. And it was one of the shortest legs in the race.
I mean, I think for myself too, I think that I would run the risk personally of accidentally dehydrating myself. Like I'd be so concerned about running out of water that I wouldn't drink water.
There was some of that. I mean, like there was one leg I know I finished with like a half a liter left because I would just if it's in a bladder, you can't really tell and you're just kind of sipping on it because you don't want to run out. And
Right.
I know there was another leg where I realized I had a bunch left and we were getting to water. And so I'm like, oh, it's chugging time for the next 40 minutes to get rid of all this.
Got it. Okay. How would your stomach get, Abby?
The oases provided by the race were fascinating because you really got a sense of the harshness of the landscape. Like there were 2 areas where they just had these massive drums of water and there were bees like swarming around it because it was so clear they had no other source of water either. So they were like, you couldn't even touch the spigot because it was just covered in bees. It was just this really interesting moment. You pause and you reflect on these conditions that people are living in, animals are living in. We're just passing through, but it was like, yeah, I found that to be really powerful.
How much interaction did you have with man-made leftovers? Were there buildings? Were there railroad tracks? You mentioned the gas station, or was this one of these races where you were just out in? There was no one around. There was no humanity had traveled through there.
We were alongside infrastructure on the bike a fair bit, but not infrastructure that was, people were using, it wasn't stores, it wasn't houses, it wasn't that kind of thing. We were along power lines. We were on some stretches along rail lines, but we weren't seeing activity at all.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds to me like that trek, transitioning off that challenging bike, was a real mood enhancer for the team, right? You did a good job on that trek. Navigation was strong. Now it's time to get back on the bike. How did that go?
I got to throw in one thing here because I haven't raced with Brent a lot, but I've raced with him a few times. I've raced near him a bunch. And he planted the seed for this earlier when he commented about how when he's engaged in the map and on the trek, like that's his sweet spot. We had gotten to the last point on the trek and we had a handful of Ks to go, so between 5 and 10 Ks to go to get back to the TA. On a 2-track in the sand, almost a straight line, like there was nothing to engage with mentally. And Brent went from dialed and motivated to, the death march stagger down the middle of the road. And our pace was getting pretty slow. So we're like, hey guys, let's power nap. And Brent just goes down on his knees and puts a hand out in front of him and then goes face down in the sand. Like he doesn't try to lay down in any controlled fashion whatsoever. And so we're like, all right, guys, power nap. And I forget what he said, like 10 or 15 minutes and something. And so we closed our eyes, maybe dozed a little bit. And I forget the exact conversation, but it led to me saying, well, as long as Brent's sleeping, let's just give it a few more minutes. And muffled by the sand in his face, you hear Brent say, I'm not sleeping. So we get up, we finish, we get into the TA. We're in the TA for, I don't know, some amount of minutes, 10 to 20 minutes. And I look over and the entire right side of his face is still caked with sand. Like he hadn't even wiped the sand off his face yet. So we were in like a really rough place. But at that point, it was middle-ish, end of the second night, early morning hours. And we needed some sleep.
It was time. It was time to go down.
Yeah.
But on that death march, we also we saw a leopard hanging out in a tree, 20 feet from us. Like Matt and I are looking at it. Matt's like, is it a deer? I'm pretty sure that's not a deer. We stared at it for 2 minutes. It was
and a desert rave that to this day, we still don't know where the hell they were holding that party. But
yeah, Miley Cyrus is
Wait.
So
you were out on the trek and there was off in the distance, there was a Miley Cyrus rave going on?
We thought it was the TA. There's lights in the sky and
yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that far. We were not that far from it. It was not so off in the distance.
Wow. Okay. So Matt, you had said earlier that you had done 40 hours of racing as part of that schemo race that you did, correct? Which I believe you did very well in. I believe you were top 10, if my memory serves me correctly. How did you do with the sleep deprivation for the race?
I actually was pretty nervous about it going in, because that was kind of a big unknown for me. And in that 40-hour race, like by the time, that kind of ended, or I quit at the end, like midway through night 2. And so yeah, I was definitely nervous about that. But I actually thought, all things considered, I did pretty well with sleep deprivation. Didn't really have any major issues. I was also worried about being able to sleep.
Okay.
But after the first sleep, I didn't really have any worries about that anymore. It went pretty easily.
Excellent. So now it's so good job on that. So now it feels to me like now we're in a bit of a team flow, right? You were making the most of a challenging situation. You had a good trek behind you. You get on the bike. How long was that X bike? Brent?
So I think we need to spend a few minutes on what happened in between, because we took a really game-changing sleep that we're alluding to, but we're not talking about. So we had talked about before the race trying a longer sleep than normal, right? And, Rootstock, we generally try to sleep a little bit more than I think a lot of teams do. We try to do like 3-ish hours a night after night 1. We're not big fans of catnapping through long races like some other teams are, and like what I think traditionally people think about. And, but we've been talking a little bit about the idea of trying something longer at some point and just haven't really braved it. And I think Garrison alluded to this, like if there's any race to try a longer sleep, it's one where there's relatively low stakes and low expectations like this one,
right? Considering
where Abby and I were. So when we come off the big trek, we feast a bit, we kind of, get our stuff together, mostly TA. And then there were beds available in this TA, or at least, depending on availability. So there happened to be a room available. So we said, let's do that. I don't know if we all showered, but there were showers. We cleaned up.
That's so nice during a race.
We got ourselves settled. And, when we laid down, we set the alarm for 6 hours after going to sleep, which is like usually unheard of, right? Like this is not something that most people do unless they're forced to by a dark zone or something.
or if you're on Team Dark Zone. Those are the two reasons. Maybe. Either it's Dark Zone or you're on team with me. Okay, go ahead.
So we go to sleep, right? And we wake up, the alarm goes off. I think it was like 4:35 in the morning when the alarm went off. This would be the start of day 3. And, Matt doesn't have something necessarily to compare to this quite like this, but, Abby, Mike, and I do. And it was the funniest thing. Like we all stood up and get out of bed, and it was like, I don't know that we actually literally all said it, but we all kind of looked at each other and said variations of like, holy shit, I've never felt like this before waking up. It was remarkable, the difference that it made. Personally, I've been thinking so much the last year or two about how I increasingly feel like so many people in this sport have it wrong, to be honest. And I'm, definitely on a high horse, maybe to some degree and philosophical here. But I think forever our sport has defined itself as one that's incredible in so many ways, but is often also linked to the idea of suffering. Right. So it's, we deprive ourselves of sleep to these absolute extremes. When we do sleep, we lie down for 15 minutes in a cold ditch. And then we also pride ourselves in the fact that we shiver in that ditch. Mm-hmm. And we eat like crap. And, it's just there's a badge of honor almost in it. And obviously there are moments where you have no choice but to do those things. And, we can get into a discussion about maybe if you're trying to win a race, you maybe have to do that. But even then, I don't buy it. I think Avaya has shown us for 15 years that better diet, more sleep, plus obviously their unbelievable abilities translate to essentially an unbeaten record for 20 years. And I think it's all relative to the level you're at. And increasingly, I feel like we have it wrong, that if we slept more, we would be faster at the end of the day. We would enjoy ourselves more. If we ate more, that would also translate to better performance and more enjoyment, and being more selective about where.
Did we see that come out of the World Championships with Vitorade? Vitorade, who was sitting in 8th place, right? They provided a natural experiment for us. Vitorade was sitting in 8th place. They had to come off the water because of the dark zone. They chose to take a long sleep in a nearby farmhouse. They took the penalty, great move on their part, and they went from 8th to 2nd and blew by all the teams that forsake sleep.
Yeah, right. And, we had a chat briefly with Mary, or Abby had a chat with Mary about that experience. And one of the things she said, which really stuck with me after Namibia, especially, is she commented on the sleep was great, for sure. But the thing that was so notable about it was when they woke up, their feet had really recovered. And that race, I don't remember the details of it, but I remember a lot of teams having a lot of issues with their feet. And it was a long race. And she's like, yeah, our feet recovered. And that really made a big difference. And I think when Mike, Abby, and I woke up, I think the thing that was going through all three of our heads was our bodies feel so much better than they would normally feel waking up after 2 days of racing. Yeah. That extra time to restore and recover. And then we were not able to really execute our ideal sleep strategy for the rest of the race. But I think that block made it so that we could get through the rest of the race without really suffering too much when it came to sleep. And I really wonder if we had gotten a better second block of sleep, and you put those two together, if that would have been the sweet spot for how long we were racing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations around sleep and sleep strategy. I know for myself, as someone I'm an older racer, I'm 53 and a half. I know that when I did Expedition Ozark this past year, we were the oldest team in the race, the four of us, when you had all of our ages together. And there was no doubt that our longer sleeps played a better role in our ability to move more steadily over time. You just run out of the ability just to, if 30, 35 hours, eventually you just start running out of gas. And I think for a race like Namibia, environmentally, the stakes are so much higher when it comes to water, food, and nutrition that it gets even more important to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think it's all relative, right? So we mentioned earlier, you're with your bubble of teams. For Avaya, they're up at the top of the pile with 3, 4, 5 other elite teams. For a team like us, we're in our bubble with a number of other teams that are racing about our level. For you, you're in your bubble with the teams that are at your level. And better sleep strategy means I think I have a better chance of beating the teams in my bubble.
Right.
That's
exactly.
It. And again, I don't even think it's about beating those teams, because that's not what we really are focused on. But it's about doing the best that we can as a team and against the course, and also enjoying the experience more than suffering through it.
Yeah, it plays a role in maximizing your experience. You're spot on about that. So, and I apologize for losing the time frame here. That sleep came after the trek and before the next bike. Gotcha. So now great 6-hour sleep for $1 million. You showered. Now you start off. Now it's the race kind of reset itself a little bit in a really positive way. What was that bike like? Big bike, right? Now, was this the No Man's Land bike? Am I right?
It was.
So before we go to the bike, I just want to add on to what Brent said. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, but I don't want anybody to think that we didn't get tired and didn't shiver in a ditch.
Matt kept me up with his shivering in one particular nap.
Matt wants to clarify for the audience that there was suffering, God damn it. And I'm going to talk about it on this podcast. This ain't no tour. Right. Okay. So now, No Man's Land bike. So,
So
No Man's Land, well named, correct? How long was the distance? What was the weather like? Was it daytime? Walk us through that.
So we left the TA right as the sun was coming up. And then we kind of had a relatively short leg back to it was actually the midpoint oasis of the trek. So we made a short stop there. And then I think climbing out of there was when it really started to get hot. It was probably, 9 or 10 in the morning. And I think it was about 50 miles from that point to the next water station. And I don't think we were on kind of Jeep roads the whole time, but we didn't really see anybody else. there's kind of like a big mine off in the distance. We could see the big trucks driving around, but they were tens of miles away from where we were. And I think at one point we went down this 10K stretch. It was like a slight uphill washboard the whole way, big headwind the whole time. It took like, up until that point, we'd been going pretty well. And then I think that 10K took us like 75 minutes or something to bike. And, a lot of loose sand, a lot of washboards, a lot of, it was really hot, big headwind. No, I don't think we saw a single tree that whole 50 miles. So that was,
you were just exposed.
That was when it kind of started to get real.
So what if you had a serious bike mechanical? What would have happened?
You push the SOS button on the tracker, probably.
That's my,
depending on how serious.
I want to say that if
they could have gotten vehicles in there pretty easily.
Right.
There was quote unquote road development, but yeah, we were far from infrastructure ourselves.
Yeah. So if you tacoed a wheel on a bike, if a bike became unrideable, it wasn't you were going to walk your way out of it. It was going to be you had to call for help.
Yeah, the distances, unless you did it right before that aid station, right. But even then there was another, 30 miles of biking after that gear drop. So
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the bikes held together. And then, I remember tracking the race and watching it closely and knowing that you were in that section at that time of day. It was a pretty intense thing for you to watch. Then you came into the oasis that they had set up for you, correct? After that, you passed through that hard set and they held you there. Did you get held?
No, and there was some question about whether teams were held or not. I think in hindsight, we all figured out nobody was actually held. People were in rough shape when they got there, and a lot of teams were kind of using that as an opportunity to rest and recover. And we rolled in, and I think that's what one of the guys was alluding to earlier. It feeling like a really big boost. Because we realized, not from a competitive standpoint, just from like a race experience standpoint, we're like, wow, we managed that well. Like we literally, when a cloud passed over, we would pause for the duration of that shade. Like we were just like using what we had out there.
That's a high level of heat conservation. Oh, look, there's a cloud. Everyone stop.
Yeah. It was slow and it was tedious at times, but it worked really well. And we came into that section, I think, or to that midway point, all feeling pretty good.
Got it.
And in addition to making unique navigational decisions, long held rootstock tradition is to make wagers where Guinness is the currency during the race. And at some point somebody said, what do you think the over under is for number of teams in this next gear drop? And I'm like, oh man, like 50-50 shot there's one team, and somebody said, oh, there's not going to be anybody there or whatever. And we roll in there feeling okay, considering we did the most exposed part of the race at the perfectly wrong time of day, with not great conditions. And I think from third place on back to us, we're all sitting in that, not TA, but in that gear drop with the water and stuff. And again, not from a competitive standpoint, like, hey, we're going to jump into third, but like it felt good that as a team, we managed that so well that we got in there feeling okay, and I mean, obviously we were tired, maybe a little sunburnt, but, and Abby and Brent had to turn on parenting mode for about 20-30 minutes there because their kids were in the oasis, which was pretty cool. I mean, it's cool for us to watch. I don't know if they wanted to slip into parenting mode and then back out again in the middle of the race, but
they were happy. They were well cared for. They were excited to see us and dote on us. Like if you're going to be a parent during a race, it was a good situation to.
Well, that was because that could have gone south, right? Because I remember thinking that I remember in that first watching the race, and you had that first really, really hard bike, and you were all over the course and the whole 9 yards, and I remember saying to myself, like, I really hope, God love her, but I really hope that Heidi doesn't have Simon and Zoe in the next TA to say hi to mom and dad, because you could tell from your tracker that you had a really rough go of it, and getting in and then peeling yourself away from the kids to go back out after that would have been really hard. So it sounds like the timing of access to the kids came along at just the right time.
Yeah, and I give Heidi credit. I think she was being really attentive to not just their experience, but also ours, and wanting to make sure to balance those so that nobody was together in a really vulnerable,
in a weird spot. Yeah. And to Heidi's credit, and I hope she listens to this, that's her experience every single one of her racers. Right. She's everybody, right? Everybody who passes under the banner of one of her races gets that kind of treatment. Yours feels a bit more specialized because it was a race director / daycare center, right? But it was
but just to be clear, so Heidi and Stefan, like, they are a dynamic duo, race directors, past racers at a pretty high level, and parents. So they wear similar hats. We found out after the race, I was speaking with, I think, one of the members of, was it Songlines, Brent? I can't remember, who said that, because there's a couple on that team also, right? On Songlines. And Heidi and Stefan had watched their kids during an expedition race a few years earlier. So this is like, we are not as unique as we might have.
It had been done before.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think they're the only people on the planet. I mean, I don't even know if they're people, because I don't know that Stefan. I wonder if Stefan like that was his choice as well, or if it was just Heidi. Like I don't know. I mean, he may have just been a good sport, but it was all Heidi. I mean, like, no one, I think, could or really would do that. Like, we direct multi-day races. I mean, I would love to offer that to somebody. There is absolutely no way I could do that. Like,
I've had the luck of being behind the tape with them in an expedition race, and I won't say they barely kept themselves alive, but it was touch or go sometimes. Right. So it was impressive that Heidi stepped up and did that. And the kids, Simon got his steady supply of stuffies, and Zoe was occupied, and like all was good.
Yeah, that I agree with. I think from a big picture perspective, we could do a lot as race directors. We could do a lot as volunteers. Caring for a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old, that's pretty high level asking for that. Okay, so you had the bike and you came through no man's land, and the bike finished up at one of the more amazing parts of the race, Spitzkoppe National Park. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was probably one of the sections I think we were all like most impressed by, and for a few reasons. It was gorgeous, first and foremost. And after, like, sandwiched between these two huge bike legs, you see, it's a little 6 mile-ish. I think it was 6 hour-ish. Sorry, 6 hour-ish, 6-7 hour trekking loop. It didn't feel like it was going to be much. I mean, not to like diminish, what we were told it was going to be or whatever. But we got out there, and an hour or two into it, we're like, this is spectacular. Like, we know we're going back to where we started. But they were very thoughtful about where they put the checkpoints, how you move through the section, and it was very intentional. There's some pretty, I think Matt used the term sporty sections where we were kind of scrambling up and down some rocks, which was a little bit unexpected, but super cool. And again, we did it through the hottest part of the day, which maybe wouldn't have been our first choice. But the upside is we could see it all the whole time we were doing it. So I, for one, I ended up enjoying that way more than I thought I was going to, because I just thought it was going to be like, it's a little trekking loop. I kind of maybe didn't recognize how spectacular it was going to be.
Is my memory correct? There were ropes and ladders during that section?
Yeah, it was parts of it were really technical. There was you alluded to a rappel. There was a very exposed rappel. I mean, the rappel itself was, what rappels are once you're on the rope, but like just getting down to the ropes was pretty eye-opening, I think, for some people. There's also this unmanned checkpoint where you had to scramble, you had to wear your helmet, you had to kind of climb up a, trailless mountainside, basically through like a boulder field, essentially. And you got to a certain point where there was a rope assist up to a keyhole through the rock. And the checkpoint was in the keyhole, and you went out the other side and you went down the other side, which was similarly, you start off on a rope or like a chain or something, and then you're descending on your own. And that was, that was legit, it was really exposed. And, I don't know, I think there may have been a couple teams that like bailed out on those, on that one at least.
Yeah, there were. There were some teams that chose different routes during that.
It was a sensational section. I mean, 200 kilometers of biking for, a 6-hour foot section. And I can't believe it was worth it, but it was worth it.
So knowing how beautiful that was, and clearly the teams enjoyed it, and kudos to Stefan and Heidi for putting that on there. Was this the point in the race that you began to make the mental and physical turn for home? Like, did you begin to feel that you were going back, or were you still out there on this? Abby, you shaking your head no when I asked that question. What do you think?
Yeah, we still had a 80-ish mile bike, or I can't remember if it was miles or kilometers.
Yeah, I think it was about 80 miles.
Yeah.
To get you back, right? Because the TA repeated itself.
To get us back to that rave area, TA.
Right.
And then from there, a substantial, like 10 to 15 hour trek in. So,
and it's important to note that
we were coming home yet.
Yeah, despite how good we felt at the gear drop Oasis point, we completely glossed over how the bike from that point to Spitzkapa got pretty ragged. The roads is just the washboard was starting to bear us down. The sleep monsters were getting after us. Bums were getting sore. So having experienced that and then getting a Spitzkapa and thinking, oh, we have to do that one more time
on the way back.
Why we definitely, we weren't thinking like we were almost home yet at all.
So even though Spitzkapa was the furthest part away from the finish line, like when you look at the map, right, it's the northeast corner of the race map. That clearly wasn't a turnaround point.
No,
geographically it was.
Geographically it was, but emotionally, mentally it wasn't. There was still a lot of race left ahead of you.
Yeah. And I think Matt alluded to this earlier, right? Like there was also a recognition of like, we needed to sleep again. And you're looking at all your options and realizing you have no real options. You're going to have to, we did try to sleep when we got back to TA that afternoon because it was an awkward time, right? Like we got back kind of mid to late afternoon from the trek and it's hot and, there's some activity in the TA. We tried to sleep for a couple of hours. It wasn't a good sleep.
Yeah, that bike in the front of your head, right? You have that bike waiting for you to get back. Yeah,
and it's just like the conditions. It was hard to sleep. And I'm not a fan of sleeping in TA. I think it's like almost always a mistake. Right. And unless you've got like like we did the first one where there's actually like infrastructure and you can go get a room somewhere. And like as almost always goes, it probably was a mistake. We probably should have just gotten on our bikes and started to ride. Right. Because we ended up having to sleep in the field. And as Matt alluded to, there was nowhere to sleep. Like we looked really hard at, is there any chance we can get inside a building somewhere? And it would have had to be around Spitzkapa, and there didn't seem to be any options. So we just left. And once you left, there was nothing. So it was, curling up in a sandy riverbed up in the high desert on a relatively cold night, which was shocking. Like we knew we had to get through all that and that it was going to be a long night. And it was exactly what I think we thought it would be.
And this was the shivering in the ditch part of the story, Matt?
Yeah. So I think we did two stops to shiver in a ditch for an hour or so and just to kind of make our way through what was basically the last night of the race.
Gotcha. And that was you just had to piece together distance and miles and sleep and just keep moving forward and just rest when you have to.
We had kind of as a team decided as soon as somebody starts falling off or nodding off, we're going to stop. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to hem and haw. And so for the first sleep, I am often the one falling asleep. And I certainly was the one falling apart the previous night when we were coming into Spitzkapa. And I think I was like taking off a glove or doing something that caused me to fall back for a second. And the three guys were like, oh, we should stop. We're tired. And I was like, well, I'm not going to correct them. So we slept for an hour. And then as we were coming toward dawn, I think something very similar happened to Matt. You like sat down or something and everyone was like, oh, he must be tired. So let's take another nap. And afterward you were like, I was actually fine. But so we had these two. I mean, it was super decisive. It was quick. It was efficient. It was probably exactly what we should have done. But both of them were kind of like miscommunications that prompted us to sleep in that moment.
It feels like as a team, you were all still really gelling very, very well. Right? You were communicating, you were navigating well, speaking to each other, taking care of each other. Were you running into any of those common day 3, day 4, day 5 tensions that teams go through between fatigue and hunger? Or was the Rootstock Racing machine just rolling forward?
the biggest conflict we had, honestly, was like trying to decide what flavor milkshakes to get in one of the that wasn't an actual conflict, but like this was possibly the most
That's as close as it came. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it just everything gelled really well, and we were just all in a really good space and worked really well together. Obviously, you have some debates sometimes. Like, I think we should do A, I think we should do B,
Right.
but like that's as far as it got, as far as any like strain or stress amongst the team.
So Garrison, why was that? I mean, you had stressors, right? We recently had a couple of professors on from Johns Hopkins talking about teams and stress and managing that. Your stressors were not uncommon to other teams, but those teams eat themselves alive. What was the secret source on Rootstock for this race?
That's a good question. I think part of it is sometimes you get lucky with the personalities of the people just fitting together really well as a full team. If three of us were experienced enough to like kind of know what to expect, and Matt was like the ultimate O negative, insert teammate here, super strong addition to the team, which you didn't ask this, but my only regret of the race was not making Matt carry more stuff, because clearly I should have done that. And yeah, it's just it was a good headspace for all of us. And again, I think the first couple of days of not knowing how Brent and Abby were going to respond, including them not knowing, we eased into the race in a slightly different way, and that may have been a contributing factor as well. I don't know, but I know it was easily like the best cohesive team experience that I've ever had in a race.
Matt, what do you think? Sitting there and someone as a relative newcomer to Expedition Racing, you know your three teammates, you've known them previously, first time racing with them. From your perspective as someone new to it, what jumps out at you for why it went so well?
I've thought about that a lot, and I haven't really gotten to a good answer. I think it's, a lot of my previous race experience was with my partner, and our most common teammate was like one of my best friends from college. So like people that I know super well. And, coming into this, I knew the three others, but we hadn't raced before, and I wouldn't say, I knew them nearly as well as some of the other people I raced with. And so, yeah, I totally had no idea what to expect. So, on some level, it's kind of like, oh, this is just how expedition racing works. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets along great, and it's there's no conflict, and
it's like this way every time, Matt. Feel free.
Yeah. So I don't know what the answer is.
Abby, what do you think?
Brent and I had another 3 weeks of traveling with each other and the kids to dissect the race and talk through all of the little bits. And one of the things we talked about a lot was the team dynamics. And I think sometimes when you race a lot with your partner, there can be a dynamic that emerges where it's there's you two and then the other two teammates. Mm-hmm. And this race for me was unique because the person for expedition races that I have raced with most when Brent isn't there is Garrison.
Got it.
So
okay.
He and I kind of have an established rapport, an established race relationship that exists outside of Brent. And I think that actually was huge for me personally. And I don't know if it affected the rest of the team, but the experience of having almost a parity relationship with each of my teammates felt, and I don't know that I can articulate it perfectly, but it was something I was really aware of, and it felt really good. I love racing with Brent. We raced, our 17th wedding anniversary was over the race. I love being able to race with him as my partner and as my teammate. And I also really appreciated being able to race with three other people as individual teammates also. And I really the thing that I could point to was that I had these other, multi-day experiences with Garrison where we had created a different dynamic than when Brent and I are racing with two other people.
Brent, I don't want to leave you out for answering. The other three teammates have answered the question. What do you think?
I don't have a better answer. I mean, I think that, Abby, for the most part, I know what I'm getting. We race well together. We've talked sometimes in the past, the idea of like when you're on the race course as a married couple, there's that interesting question of how do you approach it? And once a long time ago, we heard someone say like, when we're racing, we're not married. And I don't really think that is what it is, because it is different, right? Like when Abby is doing something that's dangerous, or we're doing something that's dangerous on the course, like I have an awareness that I do not have for the other people, because I'm processing what I'm going to say to her parents and our children now if something goes wrong. And on the flip side, like we actually don't interact a whole lot during the race, to be honest. Like I think we both agree that sometimes we really struggle to figure out how to talk to each other when we're tired, because like, what do we have to talk about? We talk a lot outside of the normal flow of the race. So it's hard to have chit chat, with each other. And Garrison, like, I think we gel really well together. So that part is pretty easy, but, Matt was a wild card, to a degree. I think Abby and I, as kind of, core members of Rootstock Racing and often kind of generally the only two people on our team that do expedition races, like we're relatively selective about who we invite to race with us, and pretty careful. We've had a couple of like less than ideal, experiences, but in general have had a very successful career with teammates. And I think it's just because we're careful about who we invite in. And that said, it's always a risk. So, right. I would say in a lot of ways, all the credit goes to Matt. Whether he did anything different than he would do if we were racing more competitively or not, I don't know. But, he just came in and was kind of a perfect fit for the three of us, at least under the circumstances we were racing in Namibia.
Yeah, I love adventure racing for so many things, but I love watching the team dynamic unfold. And when I'm volunteering for a race, or I'm reading through a race list, and I'm looking at a TA, a start line, I always grow concerned for teams that are two pairs working as a four. So two people know each other really well, because very often the team can eat itself alive because it's one group versus one group. And clearly the dynamic you had here of racing with Garrison previously, and then Matt being as strong as he was, is that clearly that secret sauce came together successfully in this part, and everybody brought their own flavor of that to the race, and clearly, because from the experience you're relaying now, and what I saw from you after the race and all the pictures and everything, it went very, very well for you. But we're not there yet, right? So Spitzkop, bike back, and then a long trek. How long is that trek?
We had thought it was going to be like something like 12 to 15 hours is in my head is what we thought it was going to be. And then when
this was a tough course, holy cow, guys. Well, I got to tell you, like dropping a 15-hour trek that far into a race is really something else.
Well, that's what we thought it was going to be.
Oh, okay.
That's what we had in our heads. And I forget what that was probably based on the information we were given at the beginning. And then we got the maps, and Brent started saying like, I don't think this is going to be that long, guys. Right. And like, when you hear good news like that, part of you really wants to believe it. And then part of you is very scared to believe it, because then if it's not true, it's the worst experience in the world.
Right.
So it ended up being shorter than we had expected. And we didn't really confirm that till we were a few hours in. And we're like, yeah, this really isn't going to be quite the death march that we expected.
We also finished it at 10 o'clock at night or so. It was like the perfect time, because any later and we would have had to stop and sleep again. But we were able to kind of use first the daylight and then the adrenaline of the finish line pulling us in.
Gotcha. So was that one psychologically, so after you got done with that bike and you had that trek, because it was a trek to the camels to the finish? Am I understanding the race correctly?
Yeah, it was, somewhat technical trek. We started it, and there's a couple different ways to do it. And just as kind of a macro evaluation, Sandface Brent had disappeared at this point, and Racing Brent had showed up.
Yes,
in full.
That was very obvious. Yes.
Yeah, and so we made a couple cool nav decisions through there that were pretty aggressive and really fun to execute. And then we had this long flat straight section, 5th day, and Brent turns around and he's like, "You guys want to run?" It's like, okay, because there's 2 teams around us. We're like, we can kind of race these teams, like Brent said, in our bubble,
Right.
And so at that point, it was pretty cool to going into a race, not knowing how 2 people that have been touring the world are going to fare, and then we're on the 5th day. We're like, yeah, let's push it a little bit.
I remember you leapfrogging a team during that. I remember watching the tracker where one route you took, I think you went southwest. I apologize, it's been months, but going southwest, and another team took the northern route. And you cut the angle and came in front of a team there. I remember seeing that unfold, and that was a pretty aggressive too, because from the comfort of my kitchen, mind you, that looked like I thought you were going to get cliffed out a little bit on that, but you weren't. Clearly, you were able to work that pretty technical trick.
Well, we thought we might get cliffed out a little bit too, but
yeah.
we were pretty sure we weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember looking at saying out loud, like, this might go really bad for them. Like, and I did like typical dot watcher thing. I walked away from the computer a little while. Like, I check my mail. I walk around. I water the flowers. I come back in and I hit refresh. And I'm like, oh, they made it through.
Yeah, I mean, we had the same thought. And, the one thing is, it was in a similar area. I mean, it was out of the same TA. We had done the big 24+ hour loop, early in the race. So we had a feel for the landscape. Like, my feeling was everything we've seen suggests that we can probably get out of it if we need to. It was more the navigational challenge of actually working our way through what was going to be a pretty challenging landscape. Right. We mentioned it to Stefan afterward, and he actually seemed a little bit surprised. I don't know that it was something that he necessarily thought anyone would do. And as far as I know, we were the only team to do it, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. So a gamble, good call, worked out well for you. And then it took you into the camels. And how'd the camel riding go? Because that was advertised in the beginning. And I know that you can't really practice riding camels in advance. What was that experience like?
Matt, I feel like you should.
Yeah,
Matt, how was your camel, pal?
For me, it was by far the most painful part of the race.
Not the hundreds of Ks of the bike or the trekking it was like the camel was what did you in.
Well, I think it was kind of, the couple 100 Ks of biking on washboard sort of set me up for a bad camel
experience.
And, at that point, so the camel took us from probably 5K to go to 1K to go, right? So it was like, I don't know, 20 to 30 minute camel ride. And at that point, the finish line's basically in sight, and your body's starting to shut down, and I'm kind of cramped onto this camel. And
you're like, this is great. Get me there. Let's wrap this up.
And so Brent's camel fortunately had a cramp or an injury or something. So we had a little bit of an adventure. At one point, Garrison was running away on his camel. Brent was walking. We had to drop Brent's camel off at the camel barn. And when we got off, I'm like, all right, we're almost there. And Brent says, at Rootstock, we have a tradition that punching the final checkpoint is sort of an honorary for somebody, a specific person to do. But in this race, there's no punches. Each checkpoint just had a letter, and you had a passport with 4 letters on it, and you had to circle the correct one.
Okay.
But he's like, well, since there's no punches, I'm going to let you navigate to the last checkpoint. And I'm getting off my camel. I could barely walk. I'm like bent over, walking towards this last checkpoint on the beach, praying that I'm going to be able to find it.
I was watching Matt doubled over, trying to figure out if he could stand up straight. And I don't think Brent was looking at him when Brent said this. And I could just see the body language on Matt. He's like, really? Now is when I have to do this?
Thanks, pal, for the honor. I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing that for me. So clearly you found the checkpoint. You came into the finish line. And now I'm assuming, can I go to the finish line now? Did I miss anything else in between? So I want to make a confession here of the exhibition races that I've done, I've never had like the Hollywood finish line moment. it's always like weird and awkward, and I'm tired, and there's cameras and there are people, and the finish line to me is just take the photo and let me sit down. I want to say that for the sake of the conversation. How did you find the finish line experience? You had this great race out there, challenging, tough in the beginning, Spitzkop, no man's land, camels, all of that. You come to the finish line. What did it feel like? Garrison, go ahead.
It was confusing. It was like we knew the kids were going to be there, right? And to your point, like Hollywood finish, I'm thinking that's going to be kind of cool. Like the four of us cross the finish line, the kids run up and jump into parents'
You're holding
arms.
hands, you put your hands up.
That's going to be awesome. And the kids were in different places and came at us at different times, and we all had different reactions. And so I'm looking at Matt like, what should we do? And Matt's looking at me like, this is my first time doing this. What are you looking at me for? Right. And then Brent
I just had to write that camel, punch that checkpoint.
Yeah, he's still recovering from Brent's honor. And then Brent and Abby are looking at each other like, do we have to start being parents again now? And so like we got all across the finish line. I would love to see video of what it looked like, because it had to have been the most discombobulated, like non-Hollywood / impactful looking finish for what was one of the best all around race experiences ever. So it was like it's entertaining that the finish was like that. The only, like, if you look back on it, like, man, it doesn't capture the experience we had out in the course. But yeah, it was pretty interesting, because you see all the pictures of people, either arm in arm, kicking a foot up in the air or whatever. Yeah, that's not what we did at all.
Matt, what did you think? Look at you're crossing the finish line that first time. Do you have any memories of it? What jumped out at you?
Yeah, it was just kind of a relief to be done, but at the same time, a little bit sad because, you're out there for 5 days racing with this, group of people that over those days have become really good friends. And all of a sudden you're kind of back in the real world. There's a bunch of people around who, want to have conversations with you. There's kids running around. Simon's asking if you want to drink the strawberry milk, which didn't sound appetizing at all at that point in time. And yeah, so it was kind of mixed emotions.
I just want to say, like, we're all cracking up with, I may be the only one muted, but like, this is the humor that Matt brought to the entire, like, this super understated, but had us cracking up the entire race.
Right. Dry as dry gets. And clearly that was one of Matt's many superpowers he worked during the race, that he just he lowered the temperature. I have a theory. Right. And that was the benefit. And so credit to Matt is, Dark Zone's all about the newer racer and how they grow in the sport. Credit to Matt for being able to accurately read the social dynamic in the team and bringing his best self to the team alongside strong physical capacity. Right. So those things worked really well in his favor. And, he did break Simon's heart by not taking the strawberry milk, but that's a different story.
And I have yet to hear the comedy gold that came out of day 4, Matt, criticizing justifiably my decision to chug a liter of juice in a gas station. It was my first foray into high carb fueling. I didn't know it was a trend when I did it, but it seemed like a great idea at the time because A, I'm thirsty, B, I need calories. And I spent the next 45 minutes to an hour suffering mightily with a stomach ache, kind of by myself on the bike. And apparently Matt was hilarious during that time, but I was in my own world of pain. I missed out on the entire thing. So
clearly that was an in-race nutritional mistake on your part there, Garrison?
Yeah, the best way to learn things is to try them. And we were in a gas station and you're not thinking clearly on the whatever that was, morning of day 5 or whatever. And I had a little thing of juice in the previous TA that was amazing. So I'm just going to get a much bigger thing of juice and it's going to be even more amazing. Yeah. Not true.
Doesn't work that way. Matt, what are your memories of the juice moment?
I think after we left that gas station, seemed like we were having a hard time getting going again. Like it was one of those situations where somebody's got to stop and then you go another 500 meters and somebody else has got to stop. And I think Garrison was like a little ways away, doubled over in pain. And Brent, Abby, and I were I don't remember any of the details, but we were just making fun of him for drinking so much juice. And I think the other that was like the probably biggest conflict I had with any of the teammates during the race was Brent and I were arguing about whether or not there's some kind of sandwich he had ordered at the gas station, which was like what's the name for it? It's like a hamburger on toasty. And Brent ordered it, ate like one bite, said, "Oh, this is disgusting." I picked it up and it was the most delicious sandwich I'd ever eaten. So we were having an argument about whether or not it was good, which, to an outsider, I don't think would have made much sense because we didn't really have any data to back up our assertions. We just, I kept saying it was delicious. He kept saying it was gross. And
it sounds like really, really high level, tough team conflict took over during that part of the race.
I mean, from the outsider's perspective, Brent was getting pretty fussy with his palate at that point. Nothing really tasted good to him. So now I couldn't eat it because it was a burger, but I would probably have to put my money on Matt being right that it was pretty awesome.
Brent, counterpoint, what do you have to say for yourself?
I got nothing. There's something wrong with everything in that gas station. Everything.
So what I want to do is we're bumping up against 2 hours for this recording, which I expected to go for 2 full hours. And all of you have either rubbed your eyes or looked at your watches multiple times in the last few minutes. So I want to wrap this up. And what I want to do is I want to finish where we started. Abby, the first question came to you, so I want to give you the last word. As we close out this episode of The Dark Zone, what closing thoughts do you want to leave the audience with about your experience in Africa with your team?
Oh, gosh. I really it just was such a magical week. And it was a magical week for a million reasons. And it was also a magical week because I got to spend it with the 3 guys on this call. And as somebody who has had the privilege of a long racing career with amazing teammates, this was at the top of the highlights reel.
Holy cow. Over 2 hours of this episode. It might be a new record. Thanks to Rootstock for coming on to the show, and thanks for being a listener. If you like what you hear on The Dark Zone, please head over to your platform of choice and click, and subscribe. The algorithm likes that. Again, we appreciate your time. We know you have a lot of choice and where you put your ears, and we're glad you put your ears with us. And remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.